Medieval sewing party with the creative Contessa. I'm the Contessa, and this is episode 70. We've been doing a lot of medieval sewing parties, so welcome everyone. I'm just going to finish getting set up while people join. Today we're going to be working together on not a Hennin, my turret, as it was called in 15th century English, and I'm going to tell you about the latest obstacles that we have encountered today. So, well, in what I thought would be the final stage. It's not the final stage, sadly. So, yeah. If everyone just lets me know what they're working on, I'd be interested to hear about your own projects, your own triumphs, your own tribulations. Oh, well, I recognize that name. I've got my tea here. We are at, once again, the historical Hanok Starbucks in Daegu, South Korea, to get our creativity going. So yeah, we shall see what we're going to be working on. I saw that, yeah. Oh, so yeah, some of the issues I've run into, unfortunately, are that the cover that I pre-sewed is too big in several dimensions. One, the circumference is too big, so I've got all this excess. You can see I can literally grab all the excess and scrunch it together, so it's too loose. And because it's too loose, it's also too long, actually. It pulls tight here on the sides, right? But it hangs over here in the front. So I have a couple of choices to make. Should I not care, because I'm going to be making a separate cover, removable cover to go over top of it? So should I just keep on going, finish it up so I have something that's wearable? Well, I don't have anything scheduled anytime soon, medieval living history-wise, that requires a turret. So, you know, why stress myself that way? And I would know that it wasn't done nicely. So what I'm going to do is, it's all pinned up right now, but it's just pinned. It's easy for me to take off. I'm going to take it off, and I'm going to tighten it up with the inside seam, and therefore also the outside seam. And I'm going to then put it back on and hope that it fits better by giving it a little old nip and tuck. So yeah, what is everyone else working on today? I have other projects in the works. I've got some exciting news about my historical Hanbok project. And if you are out there, just let me know if you can actually hear me. We have had live streams where no one could hear me and no one told me. They just watched me talk silently like some kind of silent movie. This also gives me a chance to show you what it looks like, what the frame looks like now that it's all done. I have attached the wire. Stay tuned for a short video on that. I have attached the wire around the top, which gives the most vulnerable point, the pinnacle, extra reinforcement. And this will be especially important because this little baby is going to get thousands upon thousands of frequent flyer miles on it as I travel by plane to pretty much every medieval living history thing I attend. So I have attached that. I'm really happy how that turned out. This is wire we bought in Barcelona, actually, at a hardware store. So this is a very international turret. The vellum comes from Germany. The thread comes from, I think, France. It's linen thread. The wire comes from Barcelona, which probably means it was made in China. And of course, I have worked on it now on 3 continents. So yeah. Oh, goodness. I'm just going to have some of my tea. Yeah, we're here in this beautiful reproduction, historical Hanok. You can see the gorgeous architecture behind me. So this is what the inside looks like. I have attached the reinforcing vellum all along the front. And to refresh your memory, this is to replicate the reinforcing bands that we find on extant bishop's miters on the vellum that is on the inside of those bishop's miters. Oh, thank you. Yep, this is the interior of a 15th century headdress that is called in English turret, in French an oateur. Modern people call it a Hennin, but that is not the medieval term for it. So And that's why I sometimes refer to it as not a Hennin. So that's what we're working on today. The frame is all done, and I'm really happy how it turned out. You can kind of get an idea, right? This is how it will look basically when it's on, except it will have a veil and it won't be over top of this kerchief, right? And this is the cover, and the cover needs some help. The cover's a little too big, we found out when I put it on. So yeah. I am what I'm cosplaying a 15th century servant out here in public. Yeah, that's because I'm in Daegu, South Korea, and I definitely wasn't going to put all the layers on to come to a Starbucks for a medieval sewing party. It's a lot of effort. So what I'm going to be doing presently is actually taking this in because the cover is too big and baggy. So that's what we're doing today. So I've been doing some very interesting reading lately that I was going to share with you all. And I've learned some very interesting things about making ultramarine, the pigment, using 15th century techniques, and also making Tyrian purple, the famous imperial royal purple, that the stuff of legend. There's a lot of misconceptions out there about Tyrian purple and some correct ideas about Tyrian purple out there. So I thought I'd share some of that information with you all as well, because part of my mission is to bust myths about the Middle Ages. In fact, I encountered another damned myth from a colleague, no less, today, from my friend Ken Monshine. He wrote this very interesting article on medievalist.net about medieval timekeeping. And in it, he opens by presenting a description of what the left bank of Paris would have been like in the 13th century. And he talks about how different it would have been. And one of the things he said that would have been different would have been the stench of unwashed bodies. And Ken, that's just not true. It is not true. In 13th century Paris, there were lots of public bathhouses. People bathed regularly. And you don't need to have a bathhouse in order to bathe. A basin of water and a washcloth is all you need to not smell bad. Medieval people did not like bad smells. They thought bad smells would give you a disease called miasma. So they did everything in their power to not smell bad, including washing regularly. There's a bunch of bullshit AI accounts out there on TikTok especially that are just producing all kinds of nonsense. And one of them did this short video about the horrifying hygiene practices of the Middle Ages and actually said something about people putting rotting meat in their hair. I don't even know what that is supposedly about. Let me see, can you tell us back in the day what you would do to have a bath? Yeah, so, actually I don't think I do, yes. I demonstrate actually on this channel, on my YouTube channel, I did a live stream demonstration of washing your hair using medieval methods. Should be back in August. If you go hair washing, you'll be able to find it, no doubt. So yeah, in most of medieval Europe, or all of medieval Europe, there were bathhouses, public bathhouses. And there were they had hot rooms and they had hot water, and people would go there and they would take baths. There were actually bathtubs there and they would actually take baths. But even if you didn't have access to a bathhouse, then the thing to do is to have a basin of water and a washcloth, and the water would usually have some sweet herbs in it like lavender or sage, rose water for those who had more money, or just rose petals. And there was soap. There was soap. There's actually a 12th century book called the Trotula that has a recipe for a body wash and a hair wash. And it's basically a lye solution, so you're going to want to go carefully with that. But yeah, that's medieval people would wash their hair using this hair rinse, basically this lye solution hair rinse. And they would also wash their bodies with this sweetly scented water. And I will tell you that from personal experience, unless you're actually covered in grease, you don't really need soap that much. Water, sweet scented water will pretty much get you just as clean as you need to be. So But they did also have soap. Soap, in fact, was imported up through Spain, and that's why it was called Castile soap. And that was a lye-based soap that was also sweetly scented. So yeah, washing was really important. Now, medieval toothbrushing techniques, I might not recommend those. They did wash their teeth. Tooth care was also important. Unfortunately, they used ground chalk powder to scrub their teeth. So they took a rag and chalk powder and scrubbed their teeth. And yes, that will certainly remove any stains. It will also remove your enamel, which probably led to some tooth decay. That wouldn't have happened otherwise because the medieval diet had almost no sugar in it. And so medieval teeth are actually in relatively good condition when we find them in graves and tombs. You can tell when sugar became popular in Europe, though, because that's when the teeth really start rotting. So in the 16th century, you see a major degradation in dentition in medieval Europeans because sugar suddenly becomes much more plentiful and much more accessible, and people start consuming it in insane quantities. So, yeah. It's called a field bath, but you know what? Field baths are really all you need. This weird idea that if you don't submerge your body, you're somehow unclean is only a modern one. And yes, the word bathe technically means to submerge some part of you in water or all of you in water. So otherwise you're just washing yourself. You're not technically bathing yourself if you want to be pedantic about the language. But yeah, perfumed water. And medieval people loved their sweet smells because medieval germ theory, well, not germ theory because they didn't understand germ theory, medieval medical theory thought that illnesses were born by miasmas. Miasmas were foul air. So they did everything in their power to prevent foul-smelling air, including foul-smelling persons, so that you with your sweet-smelling self could repel the miasma. Right? So no, people were not unwashed. They didn't want to be unwashed. They were dirty only as long as they were doing dirty work, and otherwise they cleaned. And they washed their hands when they ate regularly, in fact, multiple times during a meal in some cases. But the reality is that, you don't need to wash your hair that often. Medieval people didn't, especially because men and women, for many periods and places in the Middle Ages in Europe, men and women covered their hair, which kept it from getting dusty and dirty. It kept it from getting sooty. And because they weren't constantly stripping their hair with soap, with lye-based soaps, the way we do modernly when we wash our hair every day with shampoo, their scalps didn't go into hyper-grease production, so their hair didn't get greasy the way ours does now because we strip our scalp of grease, and so the skin of our scalps produces more grease to compensate, right? Shampoo is a racket, by the way. Follow the history of the development of modern commercial shampoos and you'll see what I mean. Literally, you've been brainwashed into washing your hair more often than it needs to, just so the shampoo and conditioner companies can make their bucks. Yeah, if only sugar wasn't so tasty. Yeah, so the problem is, so here's the reason why sugar is tasty. It's because 100,000 years ago, it was hard for humans to find easily accessible calories. Right? Before the agricultural revolution, we couldn't just go out and get a boatload of sugar, right? The natural sources of sugar were fruit, which were only available at certain times of year. Honey, which usually honey at that point was in a tree up high, and so you had to climb a tree to get to a beehive and then risk angry bees to get their honey. Right? And that was it. Those were the available forms of sugar. So we evolved this mechanism that on the rare occasions we encountered the easily accessible calories of these simple carbohydrates, we were programmed to eat as much of it as we could because there wasn't that much to eat. But guess what? Now it's everywhere, and that part of our brain is still there. So we've been programmed by evolution from a survival perspective to eat as much sugar as possible, But now we sit on our asses all the time and there's sugar everywhere. So yeah, that's the reason why sugar is tasty to us, and it's a good reason, or was a good reason, and the chances of us evolving out of that are nil, because diabetes doesn't really kill us off for the most part before we have children. So the likelihood of us evolving past that, and of that adaptation going away genetically, are pretty small. So we just have to control ourselves. Yeah. Sugar, tobacco, and salt, the scourge of humanity. I mean, so salt, I will say that salt, tobacco is the scourge of humanity. I will grant you that. Salt, however, it has actually saved us in a lot of ways from food preservation. Because honestly, salt is a microbial retardant, and it is what has allowed civilization to thrive, honestly. Now, we could debate whether it's a good thing that civilization has thrived or not, but I'm glad I exist, so therefore I'm glad that there is salt in the world. Yeah. Oh, Edward, lovely to see you. So yeah, the myth of poor medieval hygiene is just that. Now, when hygiene started to get bad was during the 16th century, which is not the Middle Ages anymore, by the way, and the Reformation, because the Reformation, all of these new regressive churches that had a bug up their asses about sex, of course, viewed the bathhouses as a chance for people to engage in illicit activity, sinful activity. And so they closed all those places where the Reformation was, the bathhouses closed. So, unfortunately, at the same time, there was also a syphilis outbreak in the 16th century in Europe, and the theory was that syphilis was being spread through the bathhouses, and it kind of was, but not for the reason that people thought it was. So yeah, the bathhouses closed in the 16th century, and suddenly it is a lot harder to bathe one's whole body. But even then, people could still bathe with a washcloth and a basin, and they did bathe. It's really in the poverty, the extreme poverty brought about by the Industrial Revolution, that you start to see a real downturn in human hygiene. And that's, we're talking late 18th and 19th century, not the Middle Ages. In fact, there's a new movie coming out, Werewolf, and the first stills I have seen of it are not terribly promising. It's set in 13th century England, and everyone is covered in mud. It looks like they literally, I know for a fact that for this set, they brought in more mud to make an already muddy England look even muddier. It's kind of crazy. Yeah. Yeah. So for those who are just joining, I am working on the lining for my, not a Hennin, my 15th century princess hat, as some of you know it, the turret, as it was called in English, the ouateur in French. And I thought I had finished this cover and it was ready to go on. I pinned it on and it was just too big. So I'm taking in some of the baggy. This is the lining, and this will be on the outside. I'm tightening it so that it will be less baggy and will hopefully therefore fit better. We'll see. We will see. I'm going to first do a running stitch to make sure that everything is good before I do a tighter back stitch. So for those who know me, for those who don't know me, I'm the creative Contessa. Welcome to my stream. I am here in Daegu, South Korea. If you're enjoying, please like and subscribe. I do these sewing parties. I took a break because we were traveling the world, but I'm back now. So we will be doing these every day, some kind of live stream, whether it's a sewing party or medieval story time or cooking. I will be getting back to cooking at some point this weekend. So stay tuned for cooking, medieval cooking with the creative Contessa. We will be exploring some actual recipes from the 14th and 15th century, reconstructing them together, making them as close as I can, given my modern kitchen, to the medieval techniques. And exploring options and possible interpretations of original medieval recipes. So stay tuned for that fun also. I have this fun meatball recipe for the weekend that is a combination of lamb and pork. And it looks really tasty. So I do love meatballs. So yeah. I'm a nomad these days. I do spend a lot of my time in South Korea. In the last 11 years, I have probably spent 8 of them more or less here. Yeah. So yeah, we're in Daegu currently, and it's one of my favorite cities in Korea because it's a small, big city. So all the amenities of a big city without sprawling for 100 miles in any direction the way Seoul does. And also, it's, everyone kind of knows everyone here. I have lots of friends here. It's on the KTX line, so I can pretty much get anywhere I need to be. So yeah, that is basically my story as of now. And for those who are just now meeting me, lovely to meet you. Welcome to my community. I am interested in exploring and recreating historical material culture, medieval and pre-medieval in some cases. Specifically, I am about to start a new research project on historical Korean clothing. I've been researching it over the last bunch of years, but I've made the connections to actually go and look at historical Korean garments, hold them with my hands, look at the seams, look at how the layers go together, and see how these garments were actually constructed so that I can start recreating them myself. So I'm very excited about that prospect. And I'm going to be publishing a paper. I'm working with a world-renowned expert on historical Korean clothing. Her name is Dr. Minji Kim. She is also from Daegu originally, even though she lives in San Francisco currently, but she is visiting her family here, and so she and I have connected, and we have some plans over the next month and a half to visit some museums and view some collections directly with our eyes and our fingers. So I'm really excited. Yeah. Do I speak the language? I speak Korean like a 4-year-old. I am learning the classes. The problem is the classes I was taking, they stopped offering them. And they were being offered through the YMCA. And the only other really good classes, and by good I mean classes that work for my style of learning. I'm an immersive learner. I prefer to do a language class every day for a couple of hours every day and really dive into it. I don't do well with just once a week or twice a week. And I also prefer a structure of a class, because I'm a professional linguist actually. I prefer a foreign language class where it all works together. So we learn vocabulary, then we learn how to use that vocabulary in practical ways. We learn grammatical structure, then we use the grammatical structure with the vocabulary that we've learned, so that we're really building this very useful practical bundle. And I don't always find that, unfortunately, in the foreign language classes I've taken over the years. So, yeah. But I am looking, actually, our situation has been really tenuous these last couple of years, so we haven't really known how long we were ever going to be in one place, so that's made it hard for me to really pursue the kind of Korean classes that work best for me. So yeah, we're hoping that we're going to get some clarity on our living sitch very soon, hopefully. And if that involves being here in Korea, then I plan on going to the local university and taking their immersive Korean for Foreigners class, which will be 5 days a week, 3 to 4 hours a day for several months, which is definitely the way I prefer it. But I do currently speak Korean like a 4-year-old, and I can read and write just fine. So. Definitely, oh gosh, there it is. Are you Amish? I knew, no. How can you tell I'm not Amish? Well, one, all of this skin that you see, not Amish. No, 15th century French is what you see on me today. This is definitely a 15th century French look. And actually, technically, I am either wearing my underwear as a noblewoman, and since I do a noble interpretation, basically, you get the joy of seeing a noblewoman in her underwear, in her casual attire, basically. I'm cosplaying a 15th century. I'm a 15th century noblewoman cosplaying a 15th century peasant. How's that for meta? Yeah, so there is, for those who are interested in historical Korean garments, there is this resource called e-museum. And the website is emuseum.co.kr or something like that. I don't remember the exact ADI off the top of, or URL off the top of my head. But if you look up Korea E-Museum, it's only in Korean, so you will need to have a little bit of Korean to be able to actually do searches on it. But basically, the collections of all of most of the museums in Korea, the major museums anyway, of most of the museums across Korea have been digitized. They've photographed them, they've cataloged them, and they've made them available on eMuseum. And so I have actually gone through eMuseum and searched for historical Korean garments from the early Joseon era, because that's the era that interests me. Well, actually, I am interested in the Goryeo era, but Goryeo unfortunately has almost no surviving garments. But we're starting to find more as they're doing restoration work to medieval Buddhist temples here, and they're opening up the stupas, and they're finding votive garments inside of them that are actually from the Goryeo era. So stay tuned. Hopefully more research will come out on that. In the meanwhile, my research is going to be focusing on what is available, which is 16th, 17th century and 18th century garments. So I'm hoping to actually do an ensemble from each of those 3 centuries to demonstrate the differences in the change of silhouette and, if my research shows it, the change in construction techniques. There might not be a change in construction techniques. It might just be a question of changing the shapes of the components of the pieces, and that the actual order of operations is the same and the stitches are the same, or maybe not. We'll find out. No one else has researched these garments from this perspective. So I'm with Minji. We're going to be doing some actually groundbreaking research. And the most important part is that we're going to be publishing in English. Of course, most of the information about historical Korean garments is in Korean, which limits its audience. So I'm increasing my connections with curators across Korea, and they're getting increasingly on board with the idea of working with me because I have the language skills, and I also have the gift of the gab when it comes to writing in English. So I'll be able to reach a much broader audience with this knowledge than has been reached before. So very excited to evangelize the joy of authentic historical Korean clothing. Yeah, I'm pretty exciting. I'm pretty excited about it. I did sew my clothes. What you see me wearing now is every layer, everything was sewn by me by hand. This is called a smock. And if you join into medieval sewing, my medieval sewing party tomorrow or later today for some of you, depending on your time. Anyway, medieval sewing party in about 16 hours. I will get dressed. The beginning of the sewing party will be me getting dressed, and I'll explain all the layers as I get dressed, right? So this is the smock. It's made of linen. It's basically like an undershirt. This is called a kirtle. This one is made of wool. And then over top of this would normally come a gown. If you go to my YouTube channel after this live stream and you look up Burgundian getting dressed, there's a whole video showing me getting dressed from the skin out in all the layers, all the way up to including the fine headdress and everything. So you can watch that whole process and learn lots of information about it. It's about a 26-minute video. Okay, so I have just to show you what I've done a running stitch, and this is a crappy, not at all straight stitch. It's not supposed to be. I just wanted to put in a running stitch to see if I've taken in enough because it was too baggy. The lining was too baggy. So I just wanted to make certain that I've taken in enough so that when I apply it to the vellum frame, it will actually sit properly. So now that I've done that, let's go ahead and see what it looks like when I put this on. So it's lined in the, sorry, we have an enthusiastic child. I don't know how much that's coming across or not. Oh, Henry, thank you. Thank you for that compliment. I don't know how much the enthusiastic young man across the way is coming through on the microphone. He's pretty happy, isn't he? Okay, so I'm just putting this on. Now we can see if that fits better than it did before. It's a little too loose. Okay, well, it's definitely less loose. Okay, so that's what it now looks like on the inside. If you were here at the beginning, you saw how embarrassingly baggy it was. It was way too big on the inside. How's that looking now?
Looking much better.
Yeah, looking much better, right? Yeah. So that's what it looks like on the inside. I'm pretty happy with that. I might I'll go and put an actual seam in now with a proper running back stitch, and I'll probably go just a little bit to the inside of it so that it takes just a little bit more out. Oh, good. Okay. Thank you, Christina. Appreciate that. And then my plan is to actually stitch this on. Well, it's on because there's no other way. I sewed up the bottom already. So I'm going to have to actually do a whip stitch on the outside. Okay. Now the other problem for those who are just joining or joining late, the other problem here is that it's actually a little too long. See what I mean? There's a little flap here, and no amount of pulling it up will actually make it pull up because it's connected all the way around. Oh, thank you, Devil Doll. Appreciate that.
There's a good question.
Okay, good question. How long did that style last in medieval France? Okay. If you're talking about this thing that was in French called an ouateur, in English it was called a turret, this headdress. You see the first conical headdress in like the late 1450s, early 1460s. And then that continues, it seems to be worn until the early 1480s. So a little over 20 years is how long this headdress was in fashion. The problem is that you'll often see artwork that depicts women wearing this later than that, but I have to remind people that that is depicting someone who lived in the past relative to the artist. So they're showing someone who lived back in the 15th century in this headdress, but that doesn't mean it's contemporary to, say, the 1530s when the painting was painted. So art can be dangerous. I actually plan on doing a presentation on how to interpret medieval art for fashion and the dangers of interpreting medieval art for fashion. And that will include some of these posthumous portraits that were painted, say, in the 1510s or 1520s of someone like Mary of Burgundy who lived back in the 1470s, right? So yeah, this style headdress lasted from roughly 1460 to 1480, give or take a couple of years around those 2 decade markers. So not very long, actually, even though this is the iconic medieval style. Everyone looks at this upon a lady's head, right? And they think medieval. But the reality is that it's only worn for a very small part of the Middle Ages. That's a very good question. Thank you for asking. And the reason it's called a Hennin, is pretty funny. The Victorians, back in the 19th century, when these rich Victorians were doing all of this research, also in France and Italy and Germany, they were doing all this research into medieval history because it was the Neo-Gothic was in fashion, and they were kind of in love with the romance of the Middle Ages. And someone found a single passage dating to 1411 by a priest that was criticizing women for their headdresses. And in it, he instructs young boys to chase down women wearing these extravagant headdresses, shouting at them in French, "Oh, Hennin, oh, Hennin," and to pluck the headdresses from their heads. So he assumed, the researcher, I forget which Victorian researcher was the one who made this assumption and then spread the lie of the Hennin far and wide. This researcher, this Victorian antiquarian, assumed that the priest was referring to the headdress, the name of the headdress, and then he's like, well, of course, the pointy hat is the medieval headdress of excess par excellence. It must have been that. Except that in the 1410s, nowhere in Europe was anyone wearing pointy headdresses. No one. Zero, zilch, nada. No one. They weren't even wearing at best they were wearing these things called escoffions, but not hennins. And that's the only place that the word hennin appears at all in any text. Never again. Not at all in the era when these were around. Now, in the era when these were in fashion, in English, the word turret is used. The word horn is sometimes used. In French, the word atour, or bonnet pointu, pointed bonnet, basically, is sometimes used, right? So never called a hennin in the Middle Ages, which is why I cutely refer to it as a not a hennin, because it wasn't called a hennin. But unfortunately, modern people know the word hennin, and so it's hard to fight that. Yeah. What was the reason to wear it? Yeah, so I explained a lot. I know, but I'm sorry, Brian, but we have new people, you know. We have new people in the chat. You know how it is. Interesting. That's what I thought they were paintings, the style of that hat from the early 1500s. Yeah. So there are paintings that depict this hat from the early 1500s, but they're not depicting contemporary people. They're either repaintings of earlier portraits, or they're trying to depict someone who lived before in a way that the painter kind of maybe knew from their childhood, right? Like they have vague memories of it from when they were little boys. Mostly little boys, because most of the paintings that have survived were painted by men, unfortunately. Yeah. What was the reason to wear it? Fashion. What is the reason to wear anything? Right. So it was just a fashion, right? It was a way. It was a form of conspicuous consumption, if you will, because this is not a practical headdress. I can do most anything in this headdress. I can dance, I can cook, I can sew, I can run up and down stairs, I can go on long walks, but it isn't as convenient as just wearing what I'm wearing now. So it's a form of excess, right? And the cover that I'm going to make to go over this is going to be richly embroidered with pearls and gold thread, and so that'll be another layer of conspicuous consumption. And it's a question. Fashion is always about doing something different, right? In the West, it's always about doing something different. So, you know, the headdresses throughout the Middle Ages go through this interesting cycle of low profile, higher profile, lower profile, higher profile, until by the end of the last quarter of the 15th century, you get the highest profile yet. And then they get flat again by the very end of the 15th century, so, you know, 1490s to 1500. And then they do get big again, actually. But then instead of it being a hat necessarily, although we do get tall hats again in the 17th century, hats get tall again, end of the 16th and the 17th century. And then in the 18th century, we have the really big wigs. Remember the giant wigs? Some of them very, very fancy indeed. And in fact, even in the 17th century for men, there's a period of tall wigs. So, you know, that cycle just continues. It's not as much of a hat again as it is like the whole hair gets big. Yeah. So it's a question of fashion, right? We're peacocks, and we get bored of the same thing over and over and over. So we seek for ways to change it. And especially when there's a change of a court. So anytime there's a new sovereign, usually with the new sovereign comes in some way a new fashion, because it's a way that a sovereign can visually delineate themselves from their predecessor, right? The new king, the new queen wants to set themselves apart. And the best way to do that is visual, because that's the thing that impacts everyone immediately. And so they will nearly always seek to wear things different, somehow different, than what their fathers or mothers or whoever their predecessors were, right? So that's how we get to this, honestly. Wasn't there a similar fashion in the early 13 colonies? So in the end of the 17th century, hats with brims. Actually, you know, the typical witch's hat? Yeah, that was actually a fashionable hat in the 17th century. So yes, but it has a brim. It's got a wide brim. But it wasn't just worn by witches. It was worn by everyone who was fashionable. Yeah. Oh. You have the ability to ban people, don't you? Yeah. Good. Yeah. Okay, so as I was saying, I am basically happy with how this lining is now sitting. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that properly. For those who didn't get to see it earlier, here is the frame, and this is vellum. You can actually see the pattern of the goat's fur here. This was a black and white goat, apparently, or a brown and white goat, but probably black and white based on the color of the spots, right? And the good thing about vellum is that it's really resilient. See, look, I'm squeezing and it's flexing out again, right? So it's super resilient, but it's also light. So it's sturdy. I mean, look, I'm squeezing really hard and I can't make it collapse. So it's sturdy in all directions, and it's resilient, and it's light, and it's flexible. So it's the perfect framework for anything you're gonna put on your head, because you don't want something that's really heavy. Yeah. Oh, appreciate that, Dark Ivan. Dark Ivan. Dark Ivan. Dark Ivan. So yeah. Okay, now.
It's on your hair, or is it worn with pins or something?
Oh yeah, so it just sits on. Okay, so obviously I'm wearing. This isn't how it would normally be worn because I'm wearing a kerchief, right? So normally it would be worn on my head. My hair would be in a bun, right here, the crown of my head, and you can actually see this put on. Not this one, but one of my other one. if you after this live stream, if you stick around on my channel, there's a 26-minute getting dressed video that shows all the layers, including how to put this on. This one goes on over top of a band. It's called a fillet, like a headband that goes around your head like this, and the headband has a loop here. You've probably seen that loop in portraits, right? The loop on the forehead. And this just basically slips over top of that band. And because that band is usually made of wool or something sticky like velvet, something with a lot of texture like velvet, then this actually basically adheres to that band because of the nature of the velvet of the fillet. And then, if need be, you can also put hat pins basically, through this and pin it to the fillet. But I find I don't really have to do that very often. There's also a possibility that if you want extra security, because there's a bun here, and this basically ends up kind of resting more or less near or against the bun, you could actually pin it to the bun. Now, many medieval women had a lot more hair than I do. My hair, unfortunately, is not very thick, and it only grows to about the middle of my waist. A lot of medieval women were able to grow hair much longer and much thicker than I do. And so a bun on their head would actually be this really solid beehive kind of thing. And then when you put this over top of it, that beehive of hair basically acts like a hat rest. Unfortunately, I don't have that. Now, I could achieve that with a lot of fake hair, but otherwise, the fillet really helps, and I can pin it to like my scalp if I need to. We can start collecting all the hair that we comb out every day, and I can form a fake beehive. Actually, that's maybe not a bad idea. Yeah. Oh, what happened to my finger? Yeah. Spooky, welcome. Welcome to my medieval sewing party. I am the creative Contessa, and I do medieval living history, and I like to share historical creativity from across Middle Ages, across various parts of the world, across all of Eurasia, actually. So yeah, today we are working on, I am sewing the iconic medieval headdress, the Not a Hennin. And I answer questions about medieval material culture and share learnings as I sew along. So what happened to my finger? Yeah. That's a biopsy. Some of you have been following my travels. I also have a travel channel, Travels with the Creative Contessa. And I was in Athens 8 weeks ago, and I scraped my finger on a nail on the bottom of a chair in a cafe just beneath the Acropolis, and it scraped a fair chunk of skin off. And it seemed to have been healing fine for about 2 weeks. It was almost healed, and then one morning I woke up and the whole finger joint was infected and swollen, and it was nasty looking. There was this red blood blisters all over the joint. The skin was peeling in strange ways, and I couldn't bend the finger at all. It was so swollen. So, panic. I was still on the cruise. I was in Spain. I went to the emergency room. The doctor gave me antibiotics, oral antibiotics and a cream, and that seemed to have healed it. But then a couple of days after the antibiotics ended, the infection came back and wouldn't go away and wouldn't go away and wouldn't go away. So finally last week they did a biopsy. So they did a punch biopsy. They punched a chunk of skin out of my finger and sent it off for testing. So there's stitches literally right over the joint, which means that any slight bending is oh so unpleasant. And so it's splinted so that in all of my activity, I don't bend it accidentally. You can imagine this makes doing things like cutting food real fun. Sewing is special. Even just braiding my hair is unique because the finger is useless. Typing is also interesting. So far, for those who care, so far the results that have come back, there's been no bacteria and no fungus found. There are two cultures that are outstanding, and they will take another 3 weeks to culture. So yeah, that's what's happened. Hopefully the stitches will come out. Spooky, welcome to my community. Thank you for joining. Did medieval people decorate for Christmas? That is an excellent question, and yes, but not like that. Not like what you see behind me. Just so you all know, I'm actually in Starbucks, believe it or not, in Daegu, South Korea, and this is one of the most beautiful Starbucks in the world. Like, you wouldn't look here and know it's a Starbucks, right? Traditional timber frame architecture here, right? But yeah, one of the ways, the way that Starbucks got permission to build here was to rebuild historical Korean buildings and put their Starbucks in it. So this is the best Starbucks in the world. You bet your ass I come and drink tea here. They also have excellent local organic grown tea from Jeju Island.
How would they treat the finger in medieval times?
Yeah, I'll get to the medieval treatment in a while. So Christmas was a crazy time of year in the medieval world. So everyone talks about the war on Christmas. Well, that's real, but you know who waged the first war on Christmas? Actually, was the Puritans, was Christians waged the first. Most of the Protestants waged a war on Christmas. But specifically the Puritans did, because they didn't approve of the wild 12 days of partying that Christmas was from the Middle Ages up into the 17th century. So there used to be literally 12 days of feasting, gambling, dancing, drinking, the Feast of Fools. There would be an inversion of the hierarchy. A king of the fools would be appointed. And the idea of Christmas carols came from the idea of wassailing, of these troops of people going from home to home and demanding food. Right? So part of Christmas decorations, but the thing is that in the medieval world, they decorated for every feast day. And so they would have used greens, right? And that's documented, that they would have gone out and got evergreens. So whatever kind of things were still green at that time of year. Pine branches of pines, hollies, if there's any kind of vines that happen to still be green, and they would bring them in and they would decorate the hall. And in England, they would make this chandelier basically out of greens, out of the evergreen things, whatever coniferous things were still around. And they would actually hang it from the ceiling. It would not have candles in it, though. At least I don't think they put candles in it. I hope they didn't put candles in it. That might be why things burn so often. I think it was just decorative. I think they lit torches to keep things bright and light during this season. But yeah, they definitely decorated, but it wasn't. It was with lots of greens, which a lot of people do actually still put up garlands, right? So lots of garlands is one of the ways in which they would decorate. Tables would be decked out with beautiful white tablecloths, because medieval people were big on cleanliness and purity. There would have been, in upper class households, beeswax candles would have been procured in large quantities. Torches would have been procured to make sure that the Great Hall was well illuminated for the Christmas holidays. Fine clothing would have been worn. It would have been it would have been generally a very festive time, and as bright as it could be, given that Europe is pretty far north, actually, and the darkest time of year almost is right around Christmas time, just past, it's just past the solstice, or the solstice. Yeah, it's just past the winter solstice. So that is how they would have decorated. Christmas trees, of course, come from Germany, and the tradition of using a tree in some way as part of the decoration or the Christmas holiday festival seems to date back to the Middle Ages, but it's less clear exactly in what manner the trees were decorated at Christmas time. And it was actually, it was the German kings of England, Queen of England, Victoria. Actually, I think it might have even been the Georgians who brought Christmas trees with them to England. Because before that, Christmas trees weren't really a thing done outside of the German-speaking parts of the world. But greens being brought in and used to decorate and lay on the tables too. So not just like on the walls and around doorways and whatnot, but also they would put greens down on the table. So yeah, it would have been a festive time. Green and red were not Christmas colors in the Middle Ages as such. Green was, because it was the idea of, trying to scare away the dead of winter with these evergreens. So green was certainly a Christmas color in the sense of it was used to decorate the halls, but people didn't wear green in particular. Green was, however, a color worn heavily during the Maying, in the month of May. Then people wore green and actually had special green clothes made. Yeah. Am I from the past? Some people do ask me that all the time. I am currently dressed as a 15th century peasant or a 15th century noblewoman cosplaying a peasant, which is what I prefer to say I'm doing. I'm basically, if as a noblewoman dressed like this, I'm wearing my underwear, so you're welcome. So 15th century, you see the earliest, this dress with the short sleeves and the front lacing with this kind of neckline. The earliest you see that is in the Très riche de Jean Duc de Berry, the beautiful hours of John of Berry, right? Very famous illumination. That's from the 1510s. And it seems that this style of short sleeve kirtle is worn up until the 1580s, with some variations on how open it is or closed it is in the front. So yeah, I haven't done much hand sewing since I had this punch test last week, and I know why. It's very hard to sew when one of your fingers is in a splint. What are the main executions people used? Oh, execution techniques? Capital punishment in the Middle Ages? Ooh, that's a gruesome topic. Well, it kind of depends on your offense. Hanging was pretty common. Beheading was usually reserved for specific crimes like treason, but hanging, drawing, and quartering was also a execution technique reserved for treason. In fact, traitors who were only beheaded or hanged got lucky. Yeah, but those are pretty much the main forms of capital punishment in most parts of medieval Europe. Hanging, decapitation, and hanging, drawing, and quartering, followed by decapitation. Yeah. Of course, the things for which one would face capital punishment in the medieval world are not, it's very different from what would get capital punishment in certain states in the US now. It was a different time. In most places in medieval Europe, theft would see you executed, so would poaching. Yeah, because that's kind of theft. Witch trials in this era? No, not really. The medieval period was not the area of witch trials, at least not witch hunts. There were a few, and I mean very few, scattered witch trials, but mostly that was only in association with people who were accused of casting spells against the king or queen. And then it wasn't so much a question of the witch part, but you're using your witchcraft to harm the king or queen. Right, so the witch trials, like most people understand them, are a product of the Reformation. Yeah, Reformation is a real bad time for women. Women lose all sorts of status and power and rights under all of those retrograde Protestant splinter churches. It's really not a good time for women at all. So witch trials really don't start in earnest until the second half of the 16th century, and then they really kick off in the 17th century. That's when you have the biggest number of witch trials. In the 16th century, it's mostly people being punished, burned for heresy, not witchcraft. It's kind of the end of the 16th century when you see the witch trials really start. And then by the 17th century, it's in full swing. It's horrifying. It's really horrifying. Let me see. What if you use magic to help the king? Well, that's okay. And in fact, the king, so what if you use magic to help the king? Well, that is okay. And in fact, that is what one royal peer accused of witchcraft, the Duchess of Gloucester, claimed in the early 15th century when she fell on the wrong side of a political battle in what is the onset of the War of the Roses. She claimed she was accused of witchcraft. She claimed she was trying to protect Henry VI and try to restore his health. And they didn't believe her. She thankfully did not get executed for the crime of witchcraft, but the two men who were her collaborators did. So yeah, if you were, a lot of medieval magic was sympathetic to Christianity. This is a little known fact. There are lots of books about magic that are composed and copied and disseminated throughout medieval Europe. And nearly all of them involve spells and incantations that call on Jesus and the saints. It's not black magic. It's Christian magic, basically. It's sympathetic to Christianity and, of course, ties into astrology as well. And so often, the king would actually call on a wizard to cast spells to help him or enchantments to help him. So that's the Middle Ages is not what most people imagine it to be. Yeah. Let me see. Did people try to climb status by knowing higher people? Absolutely. Yes, that's a great question. Excuse my language, but yeah, absolutely. We have lots of examples of vitamin, what do we call that now? Vitamin B? Is that what we call it when you advance in the business world through connections? Anyway, yeah. Yeah, so knowing, a lot of courtiers, a lot of people would seek to become courtiers so they could work their way up and maybe even get a title, maybe even get granted lands, maybe get a better position at court. Yeah, absolutely. And we have examples of people successfully climbing, of commoners successfully climbing the social ladder. Now, commoners becoming dukes in the Middle Ages? No. But, commoners becoming minor gentry? Yes. Or just becoming, going from having no land to being a land holding yeoman? Yeah, absolutely. 100%. There was the possibility of climbing the socioeconomic ladder in the Middle Ages. It wasn't as easy as it is now, and I say that knowing full well the irony of what I'm saying. But it was possible within a limited range. Now, there were a couple of exceptional cases where someone who absolutely was not anywhere near the rank to which they were elevated, was elevated there because they were the king's favorite, nearly always a man, but that always had really bad consequences for the favorite who got elevated well above their station once the king was gone. Yeah, real gruesome stuff. Thinking Edward II and his favorites, actually. Yeah. Let me see. Who is your favorite historical figure of the time? Oh goodness, I have several favorites. I love Margaret of York. She's one of my role models. Margaret of York was was the sister of Edward II, so she was a York princess, and she married Charles, Duke of Burgundy, in a polity that was on track to be a kingdom, by the way, when she married into that clan. And unfortunately, her husband was an idiot. He was a fool. He was brash, he was rash, and he ended up dying unnecessarily in battle, in a battle that never should have been allowed to even think about happening, the Battle of Nancy in 1477. And she is so savvy and so wily that she manages to not only retain all of her wealth despite her husband dying, losing battle, by the way, and holding on to such power and endowing institutions. And she was a bibliophile, and she was so erudite and so educated and so powerful. And so I'm just fascinated by her. And it's so sad that many of the records about her private life, all of the records about her private life, basically were burnt by French revolutionaries. Ask me why I hate the French Revolution. Were burnt when the French revolutionaries burnt all the archives they burnt because they were connected to royalty. And God forbid that we preserve history. So they just set it all on fire. And so most of the records that they set on fire in Dijon specifically were records about her, were her personal expense accounts, were her letters, were her papers. And so a lot of those kinds of documents about Margaret of York have been lost. So she's particularly fascinating because of what we don't know, because what we do know is amazing, so what we don't know must be equally amazing, right? So yeah, Margaret of York for the win. Lots of biographies have been written about her, but unfortunately, not with the kind of daily life information that really fascinates me. Yeah. Other questions that I missed. I mean, there's lots of other historical figures that fascinate me. I mean, that's just the one that sprang right to mind. You know, I'm pretty much fascinated by most of the queens because their stories get untold often. They're not, you know, great men history, right? It's the dumbest way to tell history. And so to find out information about these women who held lots of power and who were highly influential, even if they weren't the queen regnant, is it's kind of a quest, right? It's like digging for buried treasure. And once you start digging, you generally find the information, except when it comes to French princesses or princesses who reigned in any part of what was France by the French Revolution, because I hate the French Revolution. Yeah.
We live in Venice.
Yeah. Let me see. Let me see. Industrial misconception of wealth. Yeah, so the funny thing about poverty, I said this earlier because I don't know if you all have seen the stills from the movie Werewolf, which has everyone in brown mud, basically. I was commenting that the idea of this mass set of the medieval population being impoverished is just not true. Poverty was not that common in the Middle Ages. It just wasn't. Most people had access to a way to make a living because there was this thing called the commons in most places in Europe. And the commons was literally a green where you could pasture your animals. So you could have a cow or a pig or goats or sheep or whatever, and you didn't need to own land in order to keep them. You could just graze them on the commons. It was the enclosure acts starting in the 16th century all across Europe that impoverished millions of people because it took away it enclosed the common spaces and gave them to the nobility and the wealthy. And that impoverished all these people who didn't actually have land of their own. They relied on the access to the commons to keep these animals, and it took away their livelihood. Not medieval, post-medieval. Also in the Middle Ages, the church had so many charitable institutions that not only provided food and clothing for the actual poor, they provided them with a roof over their head. They provided them with an education. They provided them with jobs. They provided them with a community. And those institutions were endowed by the money from the rich and the nobility and the wealthy merchants who, fearing the fires of hell and the pains of purgatory, donated large amounts of money and land so that they would hopefully spend less time in purgatory, right? So the Reformation killed that in most of Europe. And that's when poverty started really spiking, because the Protestant religions didn't believe in the idea of charity for the poor. They believed that if you were poor, it's because you deserve to be poor. And if you're rich, it's because you deserve to be rich. And so there was no reason to actually try to do anything to improve people's lots. They should improve their own lot. So yeah, there's this. Of course, there were poor people in the Middle Ages. Of course, there were people who, for example, were crippled and then they couldn't work, right? But for that, there were institutions in almost everywhere in Europe that could help them. So there just wasn't this widespread poverty. Even serfs weren't poor. Peasants were definitely not poor, by the way. Peasants literally were farmers. And many of them worked very successful farms and lived a pretty comfortable life. I mean, they worked hard when it was time to work hard, but farming is one of those things that comes in spurts of intense work, followed by periods of not so much work, during which time the farmers would go and actually contract themselves out and find other ways to earn money, to earn a living. So, yeah. Middle Ages being this time of mass poverty. The mass poverty came with the Reformation and then the Industrial Era. Let me see, am I missing any? What questions have I missed, Handsome?
Oh, Vila says hi. You remember Vila?
Oh, Vila, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Oh gosh, I'm way behind in the comments. I'm sorry, everyone. I got lecturing.
You started to answer the one question. You could change one thing that Hollywood gets wrong. You start talking about the Bible.
God, if I could change one thing that Hollywood gets wrong about the medieval period, they kind of go hand in hand. It would be the dirty clothes, the dirty drab clothes, right? Because one, everyone across all strata of medieval society except for the monastic communities where they had a specific uniform, excluding the monastic communities. Everyone across all of medieval society wore colors. We know this because of, one, the depictions of everyone from peasants to emperors to the Pope to God depicts them wearing colors, bright colors. Now, art can be deceptive. I will agree. So let's go to the archaeological record, shall we? Well, we have found garments that definitely belong to people on the lower strata because they show lots of wear and lots of repairs, and those show evidence of dye stuffs. We have records of clothes being donated to the poor, freshly made, by the way, and freshly dyed, usually in blues and yellows and greens, which are colors that are relatively inexpensive to attain and easy to dye. So we know there are vast bequests of clothing to the poor. This goes hand in hand with the endowing of rich institutions in the hopes of shortening your time in purgatory. We also know that there were secondhand markets that were selling the cast-offs of the better off segments of society. They were wearing colors, which means that the relatively inexpensive garments for sale in the secondhand markets were also colored.
They kept the color out of the garments and just sold uncolored.
Was that a comment?
No, that's me.
So, this idea of everyone wearing brown and being dirty, it just doesn't hold water. As I was saying at the beginning of the stream, bathhouses were everywhere in pre-16th century Europe, everywhere, public bathhouses. And yes, they were often places for people to have assignations, but bathing also happened there, and they were publicly accessible. And even if you don't have a bath, you can just take a rag and a basin of nicely, sweetly scented water and wash the relevant body parts, which we know people did regularly because they're in all of these health manuals from the Middle Ages. There are all sorts of concoctions and descriptions of concoctions that are used to clean the body.
Otherwise, Cosmetica Obscura would not have a business.
Yeah, otherwise, ladies, people like Cosmetica Obscura would not have a business, right? And the books of etiquette from the Middle Ages all talk about washing your hands regularly and how to keep your face and your fingers clean while dining. They talk about showing up clean to the table. Laundresses, expense accounts from households have large and lengthy and frequent laundry bills. Yes, you heard me, right? Laundry bills. Now, the layers that are getting washed are not the blue layer, but it's the white layer, the linen layers against my skin. Those are getting washed all the time. So people wanted to be clean. They knew how to be clean. And they didn't smell bad, because I'll take you back to the earlier discussion of miasmas. The medieval theory of medicine was that, and health was that disease was called by this thing referred to as a miasma, which is kind of like the proto-idea of germ theory. Really, it's of the proto-idea of airborne viruses. But they didn't understand about microscopic entities at that time. Of course, there were no microscopes, but miasmas was foul-smelling air, and the idea was that miasmas carried disease. And so, to fight miasmas, logically, how do you fight foul-smelling air? With sweet-smelling air, and with a sweet-smelling person. So medieval people were really eager to keep everything smelling as nice as possible. In homes, even in peasants' homes, in the homes of the lower class people, they would have rush mats, which would be remade relatively regularly, and they would strew about sweet-smelling herbs all about the rooms, so lavender, sage, right, so that it smelled nice. And they would change those herbs regularly so that it would keep smelling nice. So yeah, I resent the dark, dirty, and drab Middle Ages the most of anything. Also, I really resent when they hypersexualize men and women. Like men wandering around in trousers in every period of history. No, for most of the Middle Ages, in most of Europe, men are wearing hosen. Sorry. And not joined hosen either, not like pants. I mean like two separate stockings that are basically thigh highs and attached to their underwear, their braids, right? Women with their hair styled and coiffed in these crazy glamour girl hairstyles. Makeup makes me crazy. Glamour girl eyes? No, I'm sorry. Yes, medieval women wore cosmetics, but they were nothing like the medieval aesthetic. Nothing like it. So yeah, I get really irritated by the hypersexualization of men and women based on modern aesthetics. But most of all, the dark, drab, dirty middle-aged trope just burns me so much. Because honestly, the time that is dark, dirty, and depressing and drab is 19th century Europe and cities in America, right? It is filthy dirty because the Industrial Revolution has literally made the air filthy with factory smoke. And people are working these crazy long hours. They're crammed into the cities like sardines. They don't have the time. There are no more public bathhouses. They are living in absolutely horrifically dilapidated conditions in many cases because poverty is widespread. Because the second you have extreme wealth, by the way, the Middle Ages was not an era of extreme wealth. The 19th century is an era of extreme wealth. 18th century, there's a concentration of wealth. 17th century, there's a concentration of wealth. The 16th century, there's starting to be. But the Middle Ages is not really a period of the concentration of wealth, not like we understand it today.
Except for Musa.
Except for, Mansa Musa, yeah. Okay, Timbuktu, right? So, but that's, yeah.
That's different.
That's different.
That's because they literally had all the
They literally had all the gold. They had the gold mines.
It's easy to be super rich when everything's there.
Yeah, it's easy to be super rich when you own the gold mines. Okay, other questions or comments I missed? Sorry, guys. When I get on a roll, I get really far behind in the comments. So if you've asked me a question and I missed it, and it was a valid question and not just something cheeky and naughty. If it was a valid question and I didn't answer it, please pop it back in the chat, and I will try to get to it. Were courtesans a thing? Yes. Okay, sex work is indeed one of the oldest forms of work there is. It's as long as there's been civilization, there seems to have been sex work, and so there were prostitutes all across medieval Europe, as far as we can tell. And ironically, though, unlike modern conceptions, they usually had to wear more clothes, depending on where they were, than other people had to wear, and they had to wear special clothes. Like they had to wear in England in the 14th, I think starting maybe in the 13th century, but at least by the 14th century, they talk about this rayed hood. Rayed means striped, wearing this striped hood that would identify them as being sex workers. And in some places they had to wear bells, and in some places they had to wear certain kinds of platform shoes. Courtesans being this special class of educated, refined escort service, basically, that seems to have been restricted to certain polities, shall we say. The most famous examples are the Italian city-states. So there were courtesans in Rome, there were courtesans in Venice. I am not so certain about Bologna. Florence, I don't actually read about courtesans in Florence. There are public brothels in Florence, though. And those are actually instituted in the early 15th century as a way, the city's leadership hopes to. There was a rather large population of gay men in 14th and 15th century Florence, and apparently in the early 15th century, this was considered enough of an issue from the perspective of marriage and procreation. It wasn't a question of the morality of homosexuality. It was a question of, we need these men to have children. So they hoped that by creating a brothel, a public brothel, I mean, you still had to pay, but it was a public brothel. Anyone who had the coin could go there. That by creating a public brothel, it would ungayify these men. They clearly didn't understand what homosexuality was, or what caused it, what it meant about the person. But that was the hope. That was the hope that the signoria had, that by creating and managing these public brothels in early 15th century Florence, that the gay men in the city would become not gay and would start having babies. They thought it was a question of access to women, basically. So funny. But yeah, there were courtesans for certain by the late 15th century in Rome and in Venice. Now, before that, I haven't really read anything that indicated the presence of that official class of women from before then. So I don't really see, I haven't personally seen evidence of it in the Middle Ages so much. Going back further and further in time, though, you definitely see courtesans. Ancient Athens had courtesans. Anytime a society prevents men from interacting with women, it seems that society eventually and quickly develops a class of courtesans who somehow don't fall under the rules of men not being allowed to interact with women. Same thing happened in Joseon, right? That's what the Giseng are in Joseon. It's because Joseon society was Neo-Confucian, which dictated that men and women should lead entirely separate lives, except for the brief moment of procreation. And it turns out, though, that heterosexual men miss interacting with women. And so the Giseng class was born, these female entertainers. Sex was part of their job, but it wasn't most of their job. Most of their job was literally just being company for these men who didn't think it was proper to socialize with the women of their own family, including their wives. How crazy is that, right? It's like, well, you can't interact with women. Well, not proper women. So we'll create a class of improper women, and you can interact with them because they're not proper women, so they don't fall under the rules. The mental gymnastics are astounding. Did the Japanese ever clash with the medieval? Tomiyaka, when you ever clash with the medieval what? Japan absolutely has a medieval period, although medieval literally means the Middle Ages, so Japan has a feudal period, right? And Japan is more feudal than Europe ever is, like 1,000,000% more feudal. Japanese society, especially leading up to and including the Warring States period, is extremely feudal. So yeah, there is definitely a feudal period in Japan. I'm not certain what you mean by clash with the medieval. Who is the most misunderstood historical figure of the era? Machiavelli. Even though, okay, so the one that springs to mind immediately is Machiavelli. And he's not technically, depends on what you count as medieval, right? He's born in the 15th century, and he writes his treatise, Il Principe, the Prince, in the early 16th century. His work is one of the most misunderstood works, possibly in history, as misunderstood as Nietzsche is, right? And the concept of the Übermensch, based on Nietzsche's original writings, not what his bitch of a sister did to corrupt his writings to make them Nazi propaganda, right? So Machiavelli, his whole treatise is vastly misunderstood. Everyone looks at it as a cynical, a treatise about how leadership should be cynical. But what he says is true, and he means it, and he's right. Machiavelli's main premise was not that the ends justifies the means and that there are no good rulers. What he actually said was that the prince, capital P, the ruler, in order to do what is best for his people and for the state, capital S, will perforce condemn his soul to hell. Because the thing that will actually act, the choice, the action that will be the best for the majority will itself be an evil act, but it will yield good results, right? That was his premise. And he observed that through literally painful reality and experience, because he chose the wrong side in the Florentine civil wars of the early 16th century. And he faced some torture as a consequence of that, but he didn't end up executed, and so he was able to write his treatise. I would say that Machiavelli is probably one of the most understood writers.
Misunderstood.
Yeah, misunderstood. Did I say understood? Sorry, misunderstood. But historical figures in general that are actually medieval, who am I usually saying is very misunderstood? There's so many misunderstood characters,
It's because everybody looks at it through a modern eye.
Yeah, everyone looks at these leaders through a modern lens, and they judge them from our modern morality. And that's dangerous. That's very dangerous because what is considered moral and just and acceptable has changed drastically, by the way. Oh, thank you, Ibram. Really appreciate that. Have I read any Bede, and if so, am I pro Northumbria? Well, I am very pro Northumbria. I have read Bede. Beda, or Bede, as pronounced modernly, for those who don't know, is one of the great early historians, an Anglo-Saxon historian. Well, Anglo-Saxon, from the Anglo-Saxon era, right? Historian, one of Engelon's earliest historians, really, and provides a lot of really fantastic details about daily life, about history, the first millennium. So we're writing in the 7th century, right? Yeah, 7th century. And yeah, I'm pro Northumbria, and in fact, I'm part of the Society for Creative Anachronism, for those who don't know, and my persona's original name was Judith de Northumbria. So yeah, I'm definitely pro Northumbria. 100%. How differently history could have gone, right? Yeah. So other misunderstood figures. Other misunderstood figures in from the Middle Ages.
Misunderstood because their movies were so.
I mean, I think, yeah. I think Elizabeth of York is often misunderstood because everyone wants to view her as this evil throne chaser, right? She's definitely misunderstood. Not Elizabeth of York, sorry, Elizabeth Woodville, Elizabeth of York's mother. I think she's misunderstood. Richard III is actually, now that I think about it, possibly the most misunderstood figure of the medieval period. Because he gets vilified, of course, because of how the War of the Roses ended, not with him winning. And so the histories that are written about him are nearly all post-mortem, right? By the dynasty that triumphed over him. And so it's in that dynasty's interest to vilify him to the max, including and all the way up to Shakespeare. Richard III is a fantastic play, but it's not based on the actual Richard III in any way, shape, or form. If you look at the actual records from the time of Richard III, if you look at the legislation that he actually passed, if you looked at his actual acts, if you looked at him as a person, you would find out that he was actually pretty damn knightly. He was perhaps one of the last medieval knights, actually. And despite having what we now know was an actually severe scoliosis, a severe deformity, he was still out on horseback at the Battle of Bosworth Field, right? That should tell us something about him as a character. He didn't have to be out there on the battlefield. He could have let his men just go out and fight. He didn't have to go and take up arms against the opposing forces. Kings didn't always do that in the Middle Ages, but he did. Right? So I think, and people blame him for the death of the princes in the Tower. There's just no evidence. There's no actual evidence of that. If you show me actual prima facie evidence, then we'll have a different conversation. But also, on the other hand, it was not very different than what any other king of his era, leading all the way up to and including his era, had done in the name of power and power grabbing, right? And I'll be honest, having a boy king, which is what it would have been when Edward IV died, having a boy king is a real dangerous idea in the 15th century. And after 80 years almost, well, by then 60 years of chaos, intermittent chaos in England surrounding the throne, it wouldn't surprise me if Richard thought to himself, you know what? I don't want to go through any more of this nonsense. I need to do what it's going to take to create a stable kingdom here. We need to get on with the business of thriving as a polity and stop with this Game of Thrones bullshit, right? And in reality, having I don't know, how old was Prince Edward? He was like 13 when his father died, right? Something like that. Having a young teenager on the throne is not the best plan in the 15th century. It had worked sort of okay in previous centuries. It was not going to be a good plan in the atmosphere of late 15th century England. So, I think Richard III is possibly the most misunderstood character in Western European history. Eastern European history has its own host of misunderstood people. I'm not as at all well enough versed in Eastern European history to make any calls on the most misunderstood there. Yeah.
But one of the best is King Sejong.
Let me see. Let me see. Oh gosh, what else did I miss? What do you think finding Richard III isn't a biological? What do you think finding Richard III isn't a biological son of the royal line? I haven't seen Villa. I have not seen any evidence that he wasn't. That's a claim I haven't seen substantiated myself. I even heard of that claim that Richard III wasn't a royal son. Now I've heard people claim that Edward IV wasn't. But I have not seen any evidence of Richard III. Everything I've seen points to him being a legitimate son of his father. Or wait, are you talking about his father not being part of the royal line? Because I mean, he was, but some people would claim that actually Richard, Duke of York, had a stronger claim to the throne than Henry VI did, right? Because Henry VI was Henry Bolingbroke's grandson. Henry Bolingbroke was not the eldest. Was not Edward the III's eldest son, and he was not the son of Edward III's first son. Edward III's first son was the Black Prince. His son was Richard II. Henry Bolingbroke took the throne from him, right? So that's why you get the Game of Thrones in the 15th century, because of that whole nastiness. And Richard II getting deposed. Richard II is a complex character. He was at turns an amazingly wonderful ruler and at turns a horrible, duplicitous, nasty bit of a human being. So, yeah. Okay. I don't know what is happening, but I like it. Polisai, welcome to my medieval sewing party, and I'm the creative Contessa, and I enjoy discussing my learnings and understandings about medieval history and medieval material culture. So yeah, that's what's happening.
And if you're enjoying it.
Yeah, and if you're enjoying this, everyone, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Who's the most famous poet?
Who was the most famous? Oh, the most famous poet in Western Europe? Medieval Europe? Well, I mean, Chaucer. I would say that Chaucer in the modern world, Chaucer in English, Chaucer is the most famous poet. But of course, John Lydgate was also writing in about this. He was a contemporary of Chaucer, and he wrote a bunch of really beautiful poems. Of course, he doesn't get the same fame that Chaucer does. And I haven't actually looked up why Chaucer ended up winning that battle, possibly because Chaucer was a court poet in Richard's court. He was a poet of Richard II, right? He was Richard II's court poet, basically. So that might be why he ended up winning that literary game. In Italy, Dante is, of course, everyone knows him for the Commedia, but he was a poet, and he wrote many, many love poems, actually. Petrarca wrote a whole, is a pretty famous poet in the Italian. In the French, in the 15th century, you have François Villon. Before that, of course, if you view, and I view the French Arthurian romances absolutely as a form of poetry, because they're all written in this amazing poetical form, thousands upon thousands of lines, right? So Chrétien de Troyes is, of course, a very famous one. I love his work. In particular, his Conte du Graal is his story of the Grail is my favorite, because it's absolutely spine-tinglingly mystical. In the imagery in Chrétien de Troyes' Conte du Graal, the story of the Grail is absolutely, Perceval ou Conte du Graal is absolutely, wonderful. He's the one who presents the tale of the Fisher King, right? Le Roi Pêcheur, which is actually kind of a play on pêcheur being fisher, but also pêcheur being sinner. So it's a play on words that doesn't translate quite as well when you translate it to the Fisher King. But yeah, that's Chrétien de Troyes. Down in Spain, let's see. So Spain, God. Spain, Oh, it's not Spain.
No.
Oh, as a poet. Yeah, well, she did write poetry. One of my favorite authors in the Middle Ages, full stop, is Christine de Pizan, or Christina de Pisa, right? She is Pisano. She is this amazing authoress in the late 14th, early 15th century. Her husband dies, leaving her a widow with two young ladies. She's middle class, she's not gentry. She manages to support her girls with her pen, with her authorship. She gets patronage from the King of France, from the Queen of France, from the Duke of Berry, from all of these royal peers. And she manages to make a living, an honest living, having been left with not much when she was widowed. And she's a philosopher, and she openly debates, exchanges all these letters with these great male minds of the 15th century. And almost invariably, they concede her points. She engages in debates about the value of women and how they should be respected and how they are just as clever and strong and capable as men are. And she manages to engage misogynists, known misogynists from the era, and convince them of her point. So yeah, Christine, and she was a polymath, which means she was a genius. Her treatises aren't just about, feminism. She writes an entire book called the Book of the Deeds of Chivalry, which is as much a manual about how to wage war as it is a treatise on the concept of chivalry, a very practical how-to. Like literally she talks about black powder weapons and how to take care of them and what kind of mixture the black powder should have and how to store it properly so it doesn't get wet, right? So Christine de Pisan's works are really amazing, and she's also a poet. So yeah, there's a lot of really excellent literature from the Middle Ages. It's a shame that medieval literature doesn't get more shrift, honestly. Other comments and questions? Oh, thank you, Ibram. Have a lovely evening.
Evidently, there's a patrilineal dispute for Richard III and all Plantagenets.
Oh, all Plantagenets.
There is potential that there is an infidelity at some point, and they don't know where, but with the current descendant that they were tested against, of the Beaufort line, he is not connected back to the grandfather, Edward III.
But the Beaufort line is not Richard II. Richard III either. The Beaufort line is that breaks off. The Beaufort line isn't that Catherine Swynford?
Descendants of his great grandfather, Edward III.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. No, I hadn't heard that they're.
At some point between Edward III and modern descendants.
So, but they don't know when. They don't know when.
So they'd have to go through and exhume a lot of people.
Oh boy. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so the comment was, what do I think about Richard III having possibly not been actually a legitimate royal heir descended through the patrilineal line? So what we just discovered is apparently the current Beaufort descendant, you said the current Beaufort descendant of the Beaufort line descending from Edward III of England, they tested him, and apparently he does not have any Plantagenet blood. Paternal Plantagenet blood, which means that somewhere between Edward III and now, basically, or when this man was born, there was an infidelity in his line. That
female line descendants.
the female line descendant is apparently connected, but not the patrilineal. So the matrilineal line is fine, but they don't know necessarily that happened before Richard III came along. So, but Richard III wasn't part of the Beaufort line, was he? Okay. Maybe he was. Let me tell you, the family trees of the Royal English, all the Royal English family, the peers and the cadet lines from the 15th century is nightmarish. It literally looks like someone who had a mental breakdown drew it on their insane asylum chambers walls. So, yeah, that's why I'm actually much more interested in medieval material culture, because that's much easier to track than some of these crazy family trees. Seriously.
I guess there remains to know when the break or breaks in the family lineage occurred.
Oh my gosh, okay. Happy Thanksgiving. Let me see. You mentioned how makeup in media is inaccurate to how medieval women would have worn it. Could you expand on how they would have worn makeup? Yes. Okay. So actually, back home, I'm not home right now. I'm at Starbucks here in Daegu. But back in our vacation apartment, I actually have a replica jar, and I tell you what, tomorrow at my, no, if you can't make it, you can watch the recording. I will actually demonstrate the application of medieval foundation, because I have back home a jar of replica 12th century, well, foundation from a 12th century source called the Trotula, which was copied up until and including the 15th century. And basically, it's a combination of beeswax, olive oil, and the originally white lead, but for the modern replica reproduction, they chose to use titanium dioxide, which is a very, very similar mineral that makes it white, right? I'm not going to actually put lead on my face, but the original foundation that would have created this beautiful white glowing skin, mine, this is just, by the way, this is my natural white. I'm not wearing makeup of any kind right now. But most medieval women had that white glowing skin, especially in parts of the world where white glowing skin wasn't necessarily the natural hue, through the application of a white lead foundation. So it would have been very pale. Pale would have been the base. And then they would have had a little bit of a rouge based on, I think it's a carmine. So it's an extract from Kermes louse, a little bug actually. And so there would have been a little bit of rouge on their cheek, but not heavy, very light, very delicate. The palette was delicate all throughout the Middle Ages. The palette for makeup was delicate and dainty, not aggressive. They could have had kohl for their eyes. That would have been literally made from charcoal. But we don't have lots of evidence of that being used. They did, however, darken their eyebrows, and they plucked their eyebrows. Or they used a depilatory cream, which is also described in detail as a recipe in this book, the Trotula, but it uses orpiment, which will literally dissolve your hair and will also burn your skin. And so the recipe after the depilatory cream is a burn cream. But yeah, so they would have plucked their eyebrows. In fact, I need to pluck mine clearly. Fine arched eyebrows, long and high on the forehead, and not really much in the way of eye makeup. We just don't have much evidence of eyeshadow or anything like that. And rouge for the lips. So the same thing that they would have used to add some color to their cheeks, they would have put some rouge on their lips. But it would not have been an aggressive rouge. It would have been more pink, not like cherry red, right? So that would have been the cosmetics of the era. Now, we know that not all women wore them, and women who just naturally had fine skin didn't need them, right? So that would have been the makeup of the era. It would be very understated by modern standards, really. Yeah. Okay, other comments or questions I'm missing?
Vila noted that they've done more testing, and they do think that the break was back then.
Oh, interesting.
So it could be that, John of Gaunt really was the son of a Flemish butcher.
Wow, that would be very interesting. So here's the thing. As one of my favorite fellow historians, history calling points out, when it comes to the Game of Thrones in the Middle Ages, actually your blood claim doesn't really matter. Right of arms.
Mention that a lot. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, right of arms is what matters.
Henry VII claimed it by right of conquest.
Yeah, Henry VII claimed it by right of conquest, right? So in the Middle Ages, I mean, William of Normandy, the bastard, right? He had some blood. He was promised the throne, basically, right? And he came in and said, "Well, you promised it to me, so I'm taking it." So yeah, you're in the Middle Ages. It's your bloodline only matters when peaceful transitions are happening. But if someone with bigger might comes in, might makes right. So it doesn't matter. And unfortunately for Richard, if those machinations were in fact his, it doesn't matter either, because it didn't end up working out for him, because Henry VII came with his bigger power diplomacy and took it over. But you know, that battle, the Battle of Bosworth, turned on a hair. Battle of Bosworth turned on a hair. It got really quiet in here suddenly. Where did everyone go? The Battle of Bosworth turned on a hair. Lord Stanley was standing off on the sidelines with his force, waiting to see how the battle was going before joining in. And it was only when he saw that Richard's forces were starting to flag, that he moved out and joined his stepson Henry. If that day Lord Stanley had chosen to do the other way around, or maybe if he'd stayed out altogether, we might not be talking about the Anglican Church. I'd like you all to think about that for a moment, how different history would be if England had stayed Catholic and therefore hadn't waged war against France and Spain on the basis of them being Catholic for centuries, right? Just think about that for a minute. Completely. Okay, sorry everyone. Technology. If you all, oh gosh, we lost so many people there. Damn it. Okay, well, for those who hung on, thank you for hanging on. You know how technology works. I'm always going to come back if I can make it happen. Anyway, good point for me to say. If you're enjoying this, don't forget to like and subscribe, everyone. Yeah, it's been a really good chat today. But shellback dainty, not the current garish fashion trends. Exactly. And Villa says how different our country would have been, right? Like the thoughts about, I think when I'm just out and about wandering, I often ponder alternate history and how different things would have been if. For instance, how different things would have been if Charles the Bold had not been rash and basically committed a sort of accidental suicide at the Battle of Nancy, had stopped waging these battles that he was doomed to lose and had focused instead on consolidating his own realm and worked on building up towards the kingdom of Burgundy and getting that crown from the Pope that he was this close to getting, right? And eventually maybe had a male heir, right? How different history would be, because we were this close to not talking about the kingdom of France, because France was minor compared to Burgundy in the 15th century. We were this close to talking about the nation of Burgundy. So yeah, I sometimes ponder how different all of Europe would have been if Charles the Bold hadn't died there. And if Mary of Burgundy hadn't therefore married Maximilian out of a kind of sense of desperation to try to, shore up her tenuous position after her father left her in such a mess. Right? Yeah. I often ponder things like this. Yeah. If you're enjoying, please like and subscribe, everyone. And remember that notification bell, it's so annoying. It resets periodically. So if you want to be notified when I actually publish things, not when YouTube thinks you want to know that I publish things, then make sure you click on all notifications and not customize notifications or whatever. Don't let the algorithm boss you around. You can make your own informed choices. Okay, did I miss any? If I missed any other questions, just let me know. So just to update people, I'm almost done putting in the running backstitch on the new running backstitch on the lining of my turret. My Nada Hennin. This is my current project. I'm hoping to get it finished soon. Yeah, I'm going to be publishing a vlog on making this, so stay tuned for that. If you're a channel member or a patron, I publish the unedited project reports for your perusal. So if you'd like access to those, then become a member or a patron on Patreon, a channel member or a patron on Patreon. And you will get access to all of these fine extras that I provide to my people. Also, I have a Discord server for my patrons and my channel members where I publish or I share lots of extra digital resources, pictures and progress reports. We chat and bounce ideas off of each other. Oh, and I also do a live Zoom session with my channels and patrons once a month.
You can have access to our library.
Oh, and you can have access to our personal library catalog, because I have a very large personal reference library of historical primary sources and reference materials. And we've cataloged it all. And so you can actually look through our catalog and see what books we have that you might like for your own purposes. Yep. Have we actually shared, did you share that already in the Discord?
I might have to just do it again.
Go share it again in Book Corner. Is anyone else working on a project tonight? Let me just show you. This is not my best. It's really kind of hard to sew without this finger really in action. But Yeah, focus. Yeah, anyway, that inner seam, I see I've got some glamour glare going on here. Let me see if I can clean that off of the phone. I need a napkin or something. Oh, we've got this. I've got some glamour glare. I'm gonna take a sip of my tea. Talking a lot means I get thirsty. Other projects I have underway. Okay, I'm just gonna, it'll get black for a moment. I promise I'm still here. Still here, see? Okay, less glamour glare, great. Let's see, other projects I'm working on. I cut out a new black gown, the kind of gown that would go over top of this one. Some of you might call it a Burgundian gown, but it wasn't called that in the period. That's a modern costumer term. It's made of this absolutely luscious, silky black wool. I mean, silkier than silk. This fabric is the stuff of dreams. And it actually has this gorgeous sheen to it, really beautiful. I still have to cut out the train to attach to the back pieces. I have to finish cutting out the sleeves and the collar. It's going to be lined only to about mid-thigh because what I'm finding I find that there are two kinds of lining of these gowns. It's either fully lined, and usually with fur, or it's partially lined, because what we see is in expense accounts, we know this from expense accounts because we have almost no extant garments from the 1460s to the 1480s in France, and certainly not women's overgowns, but we have expense accounts. And the expense accounts in the Royal House of Scotland from the 1470s, so that would be Margaret of Denmark's expense accounts, talk about purchases for lining for her gowns, and one of the frequent amounts of fabric that is bought for the lining of her gown is 2 ells of black silk. Okay, well here's the thing, 2 ells is 2 yards. That's not going to line a whole gown, but it will line down to about the thighs, because an ell of black silk would have only been about 30 inches wide back then. It wouldn't have been the modern 60 inches or 55 inches, right? So my theory is that when it's only 1 or 2 ells that is being purchased for the lining of the gown, it's to line it down to about the mid-thigh, because there is one 16th century or 15th century gown from Italy made in about 1460 that does have a lining to, the whole bodice is lined and the skirt is lined to the mid-thigh. So that would be about 2 ells of fabric. So I will be doing that with this gown because I wanted this one to be a relatively simple, relatively light gown rather than what my other gowns are, which are super long trains and lined and interlined, and so they're kind of heavy. So this one is just going to have a lining only down to about the mid-thigh, and I probably will make a detachable fur lining that will be the entire thing, but at its base it will be lined only to mid-thigh, and then it will have a fur guard around the bottom. So that'll be fur on the outside, right? And a fur collar, ultimately. That's the plan. So that is also in the works. Okay, now let's see. Now that I've cleaned the lens, let me see if, yeah, okay, there it is. Really crappy, don't judge. This is me working without my middle finger. Oh goodness, okay. My comment screen has frozen. Have we had any other comments that I've missed? Oh, okay, so I'm going to now test, now that we've got this new line, this new seam in, I'm now going to test it by putting it into the turret, the not a Hennin.
So shellback bow is going to be Nash Leaders and Gravy. Mary Emma Guston is working on their first shift.
Ooh, nice. And they love what?
Your company.
Oh, well, thank you all. I'm really glad to be getting creative with you all together. Tomorrow's sewing party, I will be working, hopefully, I'm thinking about actually doing the sewing party and showing you the process of measuring and drafting and cutting out the train edition that will go on to the Burgundian gown. Let me know if that would interest you as part of the medieval sewing party, actually watching live while I fiddle my way through the pattern drafting process. Or would you rather just watch me sit there and sew like this? I will say that I will talk less about history while drafting because I'm going to need to focus on the drafting of the pattern. But you could then witness it live in real time, as it were, rather than as just part of the project vlog. Is anyone else working on anything? Any projects underway? Okay, so here we go. And where is everyone, by the way? If you're comfortable sharing your location, feel free to pop it in the chat. I'm personally currently in South Korea in Daegu, and I'm a world traveler. So I am frequently in various places throughout the world, and I love meeting fellow travelers. I also love meeting people who live in different parts of the world, because of the last 25 years, I've only lived 22 of them in the United States. Okay. Pulling this up so we can kind of get an idea. Now, as some of you may recall, I mentioned that it wasn't really fitting very well in the front. But what's interesting is now that we've taken in some of that bagginess on the inside.
Crochet for water transfer would be interesting.
Okay, so this is now what it looks like. It's definitely much less baggy. It fits much more nicely around the edge here. And for those who weren't here at the beginning, I will show you the slight problem here, and it's very slight and very minor, and it's actually less of a problem now that I've tightened it. So I know this looks all nice, but there's a little bit of a lip here. There's more of a lip than there should be. This should be flush against the edge like this. And I can't really pull it up anymore without it pulling the rest that's actually the proper length up further than that should be. So I've got a couple of choices, and I think I'm gonna go with the easiest choice. I'm just gonna fold that in, pin it, and put some whip stitches into place, is what I think I'm going to do, because I'm going to be making a really nice ornate, what is going to be ultimately a removable cover, so that if I want simple black, I'll have the simple black. If I want the fancy pearled and embroidered cover, then I can have that. And then I can also make different covers for different ensembles and occasions. No, I don't have any real evidence of this, but it would make sense that you would have one frame like this, and then that you could have covers that could go over top of it. And that would also explain why there aren't lots of records for having a new one of these made, but of having materials purchased for them, just the fabric, not the frame, just the fabric. That would kind of line up with why, for example, in Margaret of Denmark's, I find multiple entries for fabric for a turret, but not multiple entries for the vellum for the turret or the other materials for it. So it's a theory I'm working on, and it just kind of makes sense. So it will be attachable using only medieval methods, of course. I'm not going to use snaps or zippers or some nonsense like that, but it will be attachable. So that's right now, this is just going to be the base that will be permanently on it, and then there will be a lovely cover that will go over top of it. Yeah. Other questions, comments?
Shellback Bow asked if it was whip stitches that you said, but Bella corrected it to whip stitches.
Whip stitches, yes, not wood stitches, sorry, whip stitches. And a whip stitch is literally, for those who don't know, is literally with your needle and thread, you just spiral up a seam or whatever.
Shellback Bow is actually in Japan.
Yeah, shellback bow is in Japan. We are so close to each other. Japan is my go-to visa run place. So yeah, this is basically more or less how it will look. And it is worn, if you check out that video, you'll see it's worn with a veil generally, not always, but often worn with a veil over top, and sometimes in addition to a veil, or...
Can they see?
Oh, sort of. Yes, now they can. Yeah, like that. Right. Phone to phone communication.
Miles for cozy. I just pulled a Miles.
Yeah, you did. You just pulled a Miles. That's so funny. Wonder how many people would get that reference.
In a moment, I'll get to see it happen.
Yeah, here we go. It's interesting how much of a lag there is. You're sitting right next to me. Why am I not getting any more of the live chat? I'm not seeing anything more. Thank God you're here. I would never know what is going on.
Squirt Award says hi.
Who says hi?
Squirt Award.
Squirt Award?
Squirt Award.
Squirt Award, hello.
We're in Daegu.
We are currently in Daegu, South Korea,
At the Starbucks.
at the Starbucks. This beautiful Hanok style timber frame Starbucks. Yep, pretty fantastic. Just gonna have some of my tea.
The Colbert blue is extravagant.
The what?
He said Colbert, but I'm not sure it's supposed to be Colbert.
Colbert what?
Blue.
Blue? Oh, cobalt. He probably means cobalt. Yeah. Thank you. But interestingly, blue was actually the color that was easy to attain thanks to the omnipresence of woad, a weed. So peasants often wore blue.
This is not lapis lazuli.
This is not
which we listened
this is
to
not
today.
ultramarine.
Ronald is in Australia.
Ooh, nice, Ronald. Nice to see someone in the hemisphere, at the other end of the hemisphere, as it were. So actually, Ronald. Yes, Ronald has been part of the community.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cobalt, yes. Although Colbert does have blue eyes, I actually don't know.
Yeah. So basically, what's going to happen
Who
is,
is in Oklahoma?
ooh, Oklahoma. Wow, it is early in the morning. Yeah, early in the morning there, or the middle of the night, depending on how you count it, I guess.
Your shift is loved.
Oh, this shift.
Your girdle.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love this girdle. It's one of my favorite garments. It's my go-to. Everyone in Korea loves it too because I often wear it out and about.
She wore it to her English lesson today.
Yeah, I wore it to my. I sometimes give English lessons, and I wore it to my English lesson today. But yeah, it doesn't. People don't actually look at me like I'm weird. They admire it, so that's nice. Yep. Okay, so now I have to go ahead and decide if this is indeed enough of taken in for me, and I think I'm going to go with yes because I don't feel like doing more seams on the inside, which is not really going to be seen. So then the next step is going to be to make certain that I line this up, because this isn't actually just straightly round. It actually has a cutoff. It's a little bit shorter here in the front on purpose so that it actually exposes a little bit. It doesn't sit too far forward on my head. So that's on purpose. And I think I actually did. There's a short that shows me cutting out the vellum frame for this if you want to see how that was done with a razor knife, in case you're wondering. Be very careful.
Why you've got the splint on.
That's not why I have the splint on, though. The splint was for a biopsy, not because of the razor knife. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull this taut and pin it. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually pin it, pull it taut, and just pin it straight up, just to get it in position. And then I will worry later on about turning the edges in, because of course I'm not going to have the raw edges, right? I'll turn those edges in. But first I just want to get it seated properly and secured, the lining and the cover. And then I will worry about turning the edges in one by one. Yeah, unfortunately, no instructions for doing this have survived, because so this is all conjectural. But for those who haven't seen my the video, I have a full-length video on the history of this hat, the marvelous medieval princess hat, I think it's called. If you want more details, I have a full-length video on that, which is sort of the lead up to this actual project. And in that video, I actually show you the bishop's miters on which I've based the construction techniques and the materials for this, because I figured to myself, medieval bishop's miters have survived. These hats have not. So medieval bishop's miters are the sacred, the religious version, the clerical version of this hat, right? Because they're tall and they're pointy and they're covered in decorated fabrics. So the bishop's miters that are extant are all, the ones I've seen anyway, all stiffened on a frame of vellum. They all have wire around the top, around the pointy top to maintain the shape, and they're all lined. So I've taken that as the basis for how this style of hat should be made. Other people have experimented with other materials. They've experimented with basket weaving, and that's generally turned out to be way too heavy. Wire frame turns out if the wire is heavy enough to not bend, then it's too heavy. If it's light that it's not too physically heavy, then it bends. So it just, there's all kinds of materials have been tested. Modern buckram, when it gets wet, it deforms really easily, and the moisture from your head when you do things like dance will definitely cause it to give in. So vellum is really, it's the choice. It's the one that makes the most sense to me. Does that mean that's what these were actually made out of? I don't know, but that's what bishop's miters are made out of. So that's why I went with the vellum. Some people have asked if you can use pergaminata instead of actual vellum. Yes, because the very first one I ever made was pergaminata because I was too dumb to realize that pergaminata wasn't parchment. So yeah, absolutely, 100%. Okay, so here you can see I've got this is all nice and pinned now. Okay, so I've pulled it up as taut as I can get it in the places where it will let me pull it taut, which is most of it except for the front. So there's still, even pulled taut, there's still a little bit of a flap, but not much, but I'll still probably whip stitch that down. Comments, questions? Okay, so now I'm actually going to handle this seam. So unfortunately, there's two choices on which seam I do first. And next time I think I will do this seam and this seam first, and then I'll attach it at the bottom. This time I did it the other way around. I attached it at the bottom and did the inside seam. Oh well. There's such a gap between because I don't make new ones of these very often, because you don't need new ones very often, honestly, that I basically have to reinvent the wheel every time. But this time, at least, I'm vlogging it. The last one I made, I wasn't doing vlogging at all. So maybe now I'll have a record of the process.
I'd love to watch you drafting. I'd love to watch you drafting.
Okay, well then, medieval sewing time tomorrow will involve you watching me crawl around on the floor because I work on the floor. So I guess you're welcome for some of you who like watching, would like to see my bum in the air. I will be wearing medieval clothing, and as always, my medieval sewing party, when I'm at home anyway, will start with my getting dressed. So I'll get dressed in these layers as you see me, but I'll probably wear a different kirtle. I'll wear my red kirtle tomorrow. And I'll explain the process as we go along. So if you'd like to watch me getting dressed and ask questions about the medieval getting dressed process, then try to be there sharply at, I think I scheduled it for 11 my time, 11 a.m. Seoul time, which will be 9 p.m. on Wednesday or on Thursday, New York City, or 6 p.m. right? Yeah, 6 p.m. Seattle on Thursday night. Yeah. Okay, so here we go. This was already folded in because I made the mistake of putting a seam in all the way around and then realizing you can't just slip it on through the narrowest aperture. Should have made, if I thought about it, I would have known that. So thankfully I don't really have to fight to get this to be nice and folded in. It already is because I already sewed it once. Yay, I guess. So my recommendation would be, if you were doing this, that you would fold and iron the hem on the top part, and then just whip stitch that right onto the unfolded, unbent part that's there. See, there's no fold here. It's just straight. And then I will just whip stitch this. I know it's black on black, so I'm trying to get it to an angle where you can see it. And I'll just whip stitch it down this folded edge. It's a little dark in here. The sun is set. So let's see. I was watching today about how there is a craftsman in Canada who is still making real ultramarine from lapis lazuli using Cennino Cennini's method. And for those who don't know who Cennino Cennini is, he was an artist working in 15th century Florence, and he publishes this fantastic El Libro dell'Arte, which means the craftsman, the art, basically the manual of art, but literally, but really translates more to the craftsman's handbook. Because arte was a all-encompassing term in the 15th century. It wasn't just fine art. It included weavers and gilders and shoemakers and tailors and all of that. So it is available on internet.org, internetarchive.org in digital format, and it contains in-depth step-by-step instructions for how to paint using oils, how to paint using tempera, how to make tempera paints, how to make oil paints, how to grind your pigments, how to refine your pigments. And so this gentleman in Canada has actually taken Cennino Cennini's instructions and makes ultramarine pigment using his instructions. And it makes the most amazing blue you can imagine. But here's the thing about ultramarine. It's called ultramarine first off because that means ultramarine means overseas, because ultramarine comes from Afghanistan, because that's where the best lapis lazuli in the world is, and most of it is Afghanistan/Pakistan, depending on how you count those borders. And Cennino came up, I don't know if he devised a technique or just documented it, that would extract the lazurite, the actual blue pigment, the blue mineral from the lapis lazuli, because lapis lazuli, of course, contains other minerals. And you don't want all those minerals. If you just grind lapis lazuli, you get this kind of muddy blue. But if you extract the lazurite from it, you get that stunning blue that you see in 15th and 16th century artwork. Right? So this man in Canada, who is apparently originally from the border region of Pakistan bordering on Afghanistan, has recreated and makes ultramarine pigment for art using Cennino Cennini's methods. And in this Business Insider, of all things, has this amazing series that's posted on YouTube about how the most expensive colors in the world are made, and ultramarine is one of the ones they demonstrate. And so this technique is amazing because he actually, he takes you take the lapis lazuli, which again only comes from Afghanistan. You take the lapis lazuli and you grind it until it's a fairly fine powder, but not too fine. And then you take that powder and you mix it with a combination of beeswax, pine resin, mastic gum, and linseed oil until you make a dough, like Play-Doh. It looks like Play-Doh, literally looks like Play-Doh, the most expensive Play-Doh in the world. And you then knead it once a day for 7 days. And then you mix it with hot water, and the hot water dissolves out. It actually leaches out the lazurite, and the rest of the minerals stay suspended in the dough. And then you put your dough, you wash it multiple times to get out the lazurite, and then you dry the solution, this water that has the lazurite sediment in it. You dry it, and that gives you your ultramarine pigment. It was just it's like wow. Talk about a process. And if you think about doing all of that by hand, not having machines. This man has created machines or acquired machines that allow him to use Cennino's techniques, but mechanized. But imagine having to do all that by hand, grinding the stone by hand, sifting it by hand, mixing it by hand, kneading it by hand, right? I mean, wow. It just gives you a real appreciation. What was the conversion? 400 grams? 400 grams of lapis lazuli only yields about 20 to 30 grams of ultramarine pigment. Talk about a massive loss there. So I think he was saying something like 30 grams of ultramarine pigment sells for like $400. But when they're restoring Renaissance art, medieval and Renaissance art, the museums want the replica stuff. They want Cennino's, because that is the medieval pigment, and it looks different than the pigment that's prepared in a modern way. And it definitely looks different than the synthetic. So synthetic ultramarine does not reflect the light in the same way. Apparently, there is actually a real difference, actually measurable with the eye even, between natural ultramarine made from lapis lazuli from lazurite and the synthetic stuff. The lapis lazuli made from or the ultramarine made from lazurite reflects more light. The synthetic stuff absorbs more light, so it actually looks like a brighter, more brilliant blue. You know, another reason that we can't just rely on synthetics all the time, right? I mean, granted, synthetics way cheaper, orders of magnitude cheaper. But as the gentleman pointed out in this documentary, artists who use ultramarine, real ultramarine, can charge significantly more for their paintings because it creates a more beautiful painting. Not just because the materials are more expensive. They can actually charge more than the increase in expense from using the ultramarine.
I posted the ISBN for Chino in the conversation.
Oh, here in the chat, my condottiero, as some of you know him, has posted the ISBN for the old translation or the new translation. The old translation, which is freely available. It's out of public. It's in public domain now. Of Cennino Cennini's book of the Craftsman's Handbook, I think it's called in the translation. Yeah. Any comments? Because I'm not getting any comments here. My comment section is laughing at me. Oh, well, that's why. What the hell? Okay. Oh, Twitchy, welcome. Han, you're there. Lovely. Oh, greetings from the Balkans. Greetings from Korea.
Right. They did say that the lapis lazuli has a crystalline structure which reflects light and gives it that shine.
Oh yeah, so lapis lazuli, lazurite, has a crystalline structure which changes the way the light reflects off of it, which is what gives it that shine, which gives it that depth of color and allows it to reflect more light than the synthetic stuff. And Twitchy, Han, you're at a stay making workshop. Awesome. Stays from which period? Late 16th, 18th, 17th, 18th, early 19th century. That's fantastic, a stays making workshop. I would love to attend a stays making workshop. You know, even though I always tell people, you know, even experienced sewists should take workshops from other sewists and other costumers, because you never know what your colleagues, what your peers might know that you don't, or techniques they've developed that you haven't, or knowledge you can share. So even as an advanced sewist, I still find great benefit in taking advanced sewing workshops from other people, especially in eras that aren't necessarily my era of specialty. Yep, 100%. That's pretty awesome, Han. Okay, so I have now pinned, here we go, it's all pinned on, trying to take advantage of the reflection so you can see. Nicely pinned, that went actually pretty easily, and you can see how nice and smooth it is. Yeah, ooh, I don't know what that means. There's a Starbucks looking dessert cup floating on my screen. Oh, Santa Sunday, okay.
I don't know what that is.
Oh, what happened to my finger? Yeah, I had a biopsy because there's an infection. There is apparently an infection in my joint that I contracted 2 weeks ago while traveling in Greece. So yeah, there's stitches and they're right on the joint, and so I need the splint to keep the finger from bending and tearing the stitches out, and also from just spending all night having nightmares about tearing the stitches out. Yeah. And of course, once again, if you're enjoying, please like and subscribe. Let's see, what other comments did I miss? Oh, Mary, I just saw your thing about the shift. Did you make a shift based on the video, the short video, not very detailed video I put out, or a different one? There's another dessert, there's another sundae floating. I don't know what that means. What do Sundays mean? Oh, it's a digital currency. Oh, okay, awesome. Well, thank you for that sundae, much appreciated. Okay, so now I'm going to just double check to make sure I'm happy with this. Remember, measure thrice, cut once, pin, check again, and then sew. All right, so I'm just going to kind of use my hand to adjust and make sure that this is in fact where I want it to be. Give it a final tug. A spraying finger. Yeah. Yeah, so this isn't sprained. I've got stitches, but yeah, same idea. This makes doing a lot of things like cutting vegetables and typing and sewing indeed very interesting. On the positive side, my cat likes chewing on it, so yay, I guess. It's good to be more, provide your kitties with more engaging interaction. Okay, yep, I'm pretty happy with that. I think it's tight enough. And now that I've pulled it all taut, this is what it looks like on the inside. Right? This is what it looks like on the outside. Okay, everyone. What time is it, Handsome?
6:30.
Okay, everyone. It's dinner time and I'm getting hungry. So I'm going to give you a chance for any last comments or questions. Next sewing party will actually not be that long from now. It will be about 14 and a half hours from now. So mark your calendars or your agendas or whatever. 14 and a half hours from now will be the next medieval sewing party. Han, I know that's going to be the middle of your night. I'm so sorry. We will be, as per the request, I will be showing you how I draft the train edition onto the back panels of my new Burgundian gown. And then we'll actually start the sewing process. Oh, I also need to cut some other stuff. Yeah, well, we'll see where we get tomorrow. And I'll start off, of course, as always, with the traditional getting dressed. While I let everyone have their last comments or questions, I'd like to thank my channel members, such as Han and my patrons on Patreon. If I don't know how many of you are out there, for supporting my exploration of medieval material culture and my ability to share it with you. I would like to thank all of you who are part of my community, who comment, who ask good questions, who have subscribed, who like and leave comments under the recordings, for your support and being part of my growing community. It's been a very beautiful journey thus far, and I look forward to continuing to share creativity with you all. Otherwise, next sewing party will be 15 and a half hours. Are there any other questions or comments?
Which city are you from? Which city are you from?
I'm currently located in Daegu, South Korea, actually. The city I'm from is an interesting question. 15th century is a very stylish era. I like my sense of dressing also. Well, everyone, if you're an American and you are celebrating American Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving to you. For those of you in the rest of the world, have a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, or night. Hopefully, I'll see you all in about 14 and a half hours. Until then, everyone, stay creative.